Have you ever noticed that the exact same action can feel completely different depending on where it comes from internally? Sometimes an action feels light, energizing, alive. You lose yourself in it and time disappears. You're simply expressing something naturally. And other times, the very same action can feel heavy, pressured or draining, like you're carrying the weight of needing it to become something else. This week's integration has been on just this, the difference between action that feels freeing and action that feels binding. David, William, Pierce, welcome back. And one of the reasons I've become so connected to tantric teachings is because they've helped me explain my experiences. What I was experiencing internally but didn't fully understand externally. The teachings don't just feel philosophical to me, they feel practical, human, relational. And this week's reflection landed very personally because it forced me to look honestly, or invited me to look honestly, at where in my own life I was still acting from pressure instead of presence. This week's contemplation was this. Where did my actions feel heavy, pressured, or tied to needing a specific outcome? And where did I experience moments of natural, joyful, wholehearted expression regardless of the result? And honestly, social media became a mirror for just this. As I've reintroduced myself back into social media, I've noticed myself resisting recently while simultaneously recognizing the value that it has in supporting the work that I'm doing, helping this work reach the people it's meant to support. And that tension became something for me to observe because there seems to be a very fine line between action done from pure joy, heartfelt expression, and action tied to needing a specific outcome. The former feels playful. The latter feels pressured. And if you're part of MTY or follow me on Instagram, you've probably noticed by now how I have a genuine passion for writing. I love language, trying to structure a sentence in a way that takes something abstract in my mind and allows it to be translated emotionally inside of another human being. Watching words come alive on a page and evoking feeling, recognition, and clarity is honestly something that is deeply enjoyable for me. I find there's something sacred in it. Human beings are the only species on the planet, maybe even the universe, as far as I'm aware, that are capable of doing this thing with such depth, being able to communicate through speech and language, written and spoken. And I think there's real power in that ability. And because my writing is now also tied to my work, it sometimes can be easy to lose sight of the joy that it does genuinely bring. Suddenly there's a deadline, a metric, a desire for it to lead somewhere, to become something. And the feeling changes. Social media amplifies this too for me, because often it can feel less like a dialogue and more like speaking into a void. And I imagine this is something that many artists, musicians, creators, athletes, and entrepreneurs eventually experience. What begins as joyful play slowly becomes somewhat performative. Expression becomes pressure, creation becomes strategy, and the nervous system contracts around outcome. But great music comes from the heart, as does all great art, really. And perhaps that's precisely why it touches people so deeply, because authentic expression carries something different inside of it. A sense of presence, truth, and aliveness. And I think relationships work in the same way. When we show up with presence and authenticity, expression becomes freeing rather than binding. But the moment we slip into performance, trying to manage perception, to force outcome or secure validation, something contracts. We move from heart into head. And life begins, at least it can, feeling heavy. This is actually one of the teachings Tantra points towards through the distinction between karma and kriya. Both are forms of action, but karmic action is conditioned and conditional. The sense of, I'll do this, so I get that. Whether it's approval, success, security, validation, whatever it might be. And because the nervous system becomes attached to the outcome, the action itself becomes heavy. It becomes binding, transactional. But Kriya is different. Kriya is action arising from presence itself. Action done from authenticity, from wholehearted participation. Simply for the joy of doing that thing. Not because it guarantees something, but because something alive within genuinely wants to express itself through you. And this is a huge part of what I'm doing through men's transformational yoga, helping men navigate major life or relationship transitions to rebuild self-trust, grounded direction, so that they can go from knowing better to actually doing better, living life at their authentic edge and showing up with truth in their power. Because often the issue is not that something is wrong with you, it's that life is trying to evolve you beyond a version of yourself that you're still clinging to. So if something in that speaks to you, there's a tinge of curiosity, then head to the description, follow the link, and you'll find more information. So one of the deepest things I'm beginning to understand is that action itself is not the problem. It's attachment. It's the unconscious grasping underneath the action. The subtle feeling that this must work, or I must fix this. That person must respond. This outcome must happen. Whatever expression of that it is for you. Because the moment the nervous system becomes dependent on the result, freedom disappears. And suddenly even beautiful things become heavy. Writing becomes pressure. Relationship or intimacy becomes management. Even spirituality can become performative. Joy becomes something we try to attain instead of something that we allow to freely express through ourselves. And this week has really invited me back into a simpler question. What would it take to come back to joy? Not more force or pressure, perhaps just more spaciousness and presence. Enough room internally for authentic expression to naturally flow again. Because maybe the issue is not the action itself. Maybe the issue is the relationship we've developed towards the action. Whether we're acting from contraction or from participation. Whether we're trying to prove or simply to express. Tantra says that karmic action binds us until we no longer are the person to whom that action and result is attached. Until consciousness evolves beyond the identity that needed the outcome in the first place. And honestly, I love that. Because sometimes the suffering isn't coming from life. It's coming from who we believe we need to be in order to feel okay inside of life. When action arises from presence, from joy and authenticity, it becomes freeing rather than binding. And maybe that changes the question entirely. Not how do I force myself harder, but instead, what would joyful expression look like here? What would authenticity feel like here? What would wholehearted participation be expressed like here? Because perhaps the goal is not to remove action from our lives, but to transform the energy underneath it. To allow life to move through us more naturally again. Less performance, more participation, less pressure, more presence. So I'll leave you with this contemplation for the week. Where did your actions feel heavy, pressured, or tied to needing a specific outcome? And where did you experience moments of pure, natural, joyful, wholehearted expression, irrespective of the result? And if you'd like to go deeper into the pure tantric teaching that this newsletter was inspired by, I'll leave the link somewhere here. Thank you for being here. Appreciate your presence, and I'll see you in the next transmission. Cheers.